this is sort of interesting in that it shows obviously that I was very interested in all aspects of clothing. And I showed, I taught at Yale in the design department for 43 years. And quite often I'd get this book out and show them and say, now look here, you've got to start and keep things. And then when you go back, if you've seen something special, you'll look at it and you'll be very glad you've got it.
Absolutely, yeah. And just to have that from your time at school and to have had it all the way through your career is incredible.
Oh, I take it everywhere.
Even more incredible, you still have it then.
It's like a talisman. I mean, I say I take it everywhere. I don't take it everywhere, but people who are interested in my career, a lot of people want to know how to be a costume designer.
Yeah.
It's very hard to explain. I mean,
so I was going to say, I think we've got, I was speaking to our head of performing arts the other day. He was saying we've got quite a few girls at school now who are quite interested in going into costume design. And what would you say that they should be doing at this stage when they're at school? Just doing what you've done there?
You just have to look at everything. And you have to sort of really try and sort of lock it into your mental filing cabinet. And the thing is that you have to really look. You don't just look, you really look. You have to say what everything actually is. I mean, I'm just trying to sort of think of an example, but it's sort of, it's being aware of everybody and what they wear and how they wear it and what it represents to them and what it gives them as a character. I was I picked this book up because it's very interesting, because you see all these people in different uniforms. But this was when I was given not an award. I became what do you call it? An honorary fellow of Liverpool John Moores University, and they asked me to come, and would I give the keynote address to the graduating students. I said, oh, yes. I was thrilled to be asked to come back to Liverpool, where I'd started. And I can remember I was in Italy with my friend Lindy Hemming, who's another costume designer. I sort of said, well, I suppose I better write a few things down. What am I going to say? And she said, well, you better had, She said, and then I said, she said, where is it? And I said, well, it's in the cathedral. And she said, oh my God. It was only then that the penny dropped. I was going to be talking to 2,000 people in Liverpool Cathedral. Do you know how terrifying that was? It's nothing to do with being a costume designer, but it's everything to do with being a costume designer. You get to do all sorts of things you never think you're going to do. Never in my wildest dreams, when I was at Merchant Taylor's and we went to the cathedral one time for a special event with schools, never did I think I would be addressing the community.
Yeah. And what was it like? Were you nervous, or?
My knees were knocking underneath this rather grand robe that they put me in, you see?
Yeah.
Oh, it was really something.
Wow. Yes. Incredible.
But that's telling you about me. That's not telling you about being a costume designer. So you have to be interested in people, in characters. You have to watch how different people wear things differently, how you can see people in a you know, you could go and buy a load of Marks and Spencer's clothes, and you could put everybody in the same clothes, and they would, in 10 minutes, all have become sort of their own thing. They would be their own personality. And you have to look at things like that. And you have to have a good knowledge of fabric and how fabric can make clothes. They don't just, you know, if you've got a beautiful, big, full, ball dress, it has to be made out of something like taffeta or satin or something that's going to be glorious in a big piece. If you've got a little skimpy 1920s dress, you've got to go and find a lovely piece of chiffon or a lovely piece of crepe or something that's soft. And if you take a big piece of Duchess satin and try and make a 1920s dress, it'll look like a dog. So those are things you have to be aware of. Always looking at what goes together to make clothes and how people wear them. And before, you know, we only have what people do today. So you have to be willing to go many times to museums, art galleries. And since this incredible machine has happened, you can do a lot of research on this machine, but there's nothing like a book. There's something about going to books of different, whatever it is, and finding a subject, and it will give you time to look at it twice. It will give you time to sort of think about it all. You've still got it in your hand. There's something about the machine that's not quite the same. So I always encourage everybody to go and look at lots of exhibitions. Go and see anything that comes up that's special. You know, if there's a special exhibition about something, go and see it. Get tickets. And I could go on and on, but
I was going to say, presumably knowing and understanding kind of history and clothes at different historical periods is important too, because obviously all the different styles, as you say, the different fabrics used, and
it's why you've got to look. And that's why you've got to go. And I always used to start at Yale. I retired last year, but I would always start the first year off talking about really primitive clothing and how people started to wear clothing and what they wore and how they wore it, and how actually it was the pieces of gold and jewelry and so on that denoted who they were. And they were all sort of wearing very simple bits and pieces to begin with, but as history went on, everything got more complicated, and you have to sort of trek through a history of costume. And that's what I used to do with them, and sort of have a set up a play of the period that we were working on, so it sort of had some reality to do what was required for the play. So, and that's good, because quite often it means they have to look up rich and poor, and they have to sort of think about who wore what and when and how, which is very good. But you have to keep looking all the time, and you have to keep collecting. I mean, I keep pulling things out of the newspaper. Today, to start looking at things that catch my eye, and I think, oh, isn't that interesting? Yeah.
And what's the process? So when I was just going to say, when you get involved in a production, a play, whatever it might be, when you're first brought on board, what's the process? Presumably you have to do quite a lot of research. Do you spend time with the writers, and how do you start out putting together?
Well, I start out by reading the script carefully, whether it's Shakespeare or whether it's Neil Simon or whoever it is. I read it probably first just to get the story, and then I read it again, and I quietly sort of underline anything that says anything about what anybody's wearing, or what their clothes are, or what their personality is like, what their looks are like, anything that gives me a clue to the characters. I sort of get it all that. Then I like to spend some time with the director and say, now, how do you want to do this? Do you want this Shakespeare to be in the time that Shakespeare wrote it? Or do you want it to be in the time that Shakespeare was writing about? Or do you want it to be now? And for quite a long time, I've heard the remark, oh, I don't want it really to look too period. And that has been for quite a while. And I'm beginning to think that with this pandemic going on, people are going to say they don't want clothes, costumes at all. But they will, of course, want people to wear things that adhere to what the character is. It'll be good. It's amazing how everything comes around. Years and years ago, 62, I think it was, I did a production of Hamlet with Richard Burton, and John Gielgud was directing. And it was, we were rehearsing, I remember, up in Canada, because Richard's divorce hadn't come through with Sybil. And so he was living up there with Elizabeth Taylor in Canada. So we all trooped up to Canada. And John said, oh, darling, I think we'll all just have everybody wear their own clothes. And he said, well, now, why don't we ask all the cast tomorrow to come in their own clothes, and we'll see what they look like. We'll see what we think. So, of course, everybody came the next day, and all the young men who were carrying spears all had bright red sweaters on, and tight pants, and it was really very amusing. And it was lovely because I thought that Hume Cronin, who was playing Polonius, did come in a three-piece suit, and he was one of the people who sort of seemed to give us a clue of what he could be. But from that beginning, I then started to find clothes that were modern, but gave them a sense of their character, moved a bit more to who the characters play. And I did put, I had a pair of black pants and a black jersey top made for Richard. And of course, it was very funny because Elizabeth Taylor was sitting on the couch and we were doing the fitting, and the tailors were absolutely falling over themselves with excitement at the idea of being in the same room as Elizabeth Taylor. And everything they did, every single thing, they kept turning to her and showing the seams on his pants and this. And she finally said, I think you better talk to that lady. She's the designer. But it was so interesting to see the reaction of all these people. However, what I'm telling you is that production ended up being a kind of rehearsal version of Hamlet. They called it a rehearsal version of Hamlet. And the only people we actually put in costumes were the players when they came on stage, and they carried a trunk on, and we made period, sort of like period playing cards. And we made these the players' clothes very bright colors, red and white and blue and yellow, and we made them in felt. So they were very obviously kind of a bit sort of abstract, really. So that, to me, is very interesting to think about now, and I haven't thought about it for a long time. But I did see at the Old Vic that they did a production with a couple of actors, and they were both just obviously in their own clothes. And I thought, this is going to be how it will. But they may not have been in their own clothes. They may have had the director and the actors and maybe a designer decide what of period today they would put them in. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's sort of, it's really cheating a little bit, because saying, oh yes, this is just how they are, this is just, but it isn't quite. It's giving them a sort of bones to play the character.
Yeah, well, what they wear, whether, even if it is something, I guess, that looks like normal clothes, is part of the character, isn't it? It must be part of their process, putting it on to become.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's part of the choice of everybody as to how they perceive these characters. It's very interesting. I did a lot of plays with Edward Albee, and I would say perhaps to him about one of the male characters, oh, Edward, what do you think he should, well, how do you see him? How should he wear? What should he wear? And he would look at me and he'd say, well, you know, a sort of, maybe a little check shirt and maybe a tweed jacket and some flannels. I'd look at him and I'd think, he's describing exactly what he's wearing right now.
Nothing like staying in your comfort zone.
It's really, really interesting. You see, people and everybody sees things differently too.
Yeah. So how did you get from school to your kind of first costume design job? So you went to art school, and then how did you get?
Well, I went to Liverpool Art School, and then I went to the Central School down in on Southampton Row, and I was there for 3 years and met all the people who were sort of just wonderful to be taught by: Nora Waugh, Janetta Cochran, Ralph Cartwright, Desmond Healy, people who were very much part of the industry. And I went and did jobs. I remember going and working for a milliner, Frank Winter, when I was still at the Central School, and it was for a pantomime, and there were all these headdresses. I think there were like 24 chorus people who came skating onto the ice. It was Aladdin on ice, that was it. And these hats had 3 tiers, and at the end and every point there was a little bell, and Frank Winters set me down in the corner and he said, here darling, sew these bells, each one on a little corner, and make sure they're on very strongly. I sat there for quite a few days doing that, and we went to, I think it was at Wembley, I can't, and there was ice, it was ice, and the dress rehearsal, and when the finale came on and all the chorus came on with these bells, and they not only had them on their head, but they had them on their shoulders, and they skated on, and the noise was deafening. The director turned to whoever it was and said, the bells have to go. Now, I should have learned then that the theatre was a very treacherous place to work in. But anyway, I did a lot of interesting sidebar jobs with the old Vic and so on when I was a student at the Central School. Then I was offered a job as wardrobe supervisor at Oxford Playhouse. And I went, and I mean, I hadn't a clue what it was going to involve really, but I went off to this interview, and Frank Hauser, who was running Oxford Playhouse at the time, said, oh, you seem like a competent young lady, competent like you. Would you like to take the job? And I don't think he knew very much about it either. I think he thought, well, here she is, live one, get her off to Oxford. So I went to Oxford and I did a lot of plays there and learned on the job, totally. I mean, I was always calling somebody up at the Central School saying, how do this, or getting somebody to come down for the weekend and help with the show. Anthony Powell, who was just a year behind me, he was always coming down and helping. Extraordinary man who has done untold wonderful movies, designing costumes. Anyway, that all was a very good learning place. And we did a production of Prince Genji, and it was designed by Desmond Healy, and he brought his friend, I'm having a terrible time remembering her name, and I know it very well, Tanya Mazevich. And she was working with Sir Tyrone Guthrie in Canada on the Shakespeare Theatre there. And she said to me, wouldn't you like to come to Canada and work in the costume shop there? And I thought, well, that might be a very interesting thing to do. So, cut a long story short, I was offered the job there, went to Canada, went on the boat from Liverpool on the Sylvania to New York, and then a train from New York to Toronto, and then another train from Toronto to Stratford. It took me 5.5 days. And by the time I got to Stratford, I thought, God, am I going to be able to do this job? It's taken me 5.5 days to get here. What if I'm not suitable? I was very insecure in those days. So that's got me to Canada, and I worked in the costume shop there with wonderful people. And I met Ray Diffin, who had a costume shop in New York. He was English. He'd worked at Stratford. He was a good friend of Tanya's. He'd worked at Stratford in Canada, and then he went to New York and opened his own business. And Ivan, who was the main tailor at Stratford, took me down to New York when we were leaving, coming back to England. And he said, you've got to meet my friend Ray, who's got a costume shop here in New York, and it's very exciting. So off I went with Ivan. We had a wonderful time. We met with Ray and things went on. And then I got a call from Ray when I was back in England, and he said, would you like to come and work in my shop? I thought, wow. And I thought about it a lot. And there were a group of people that I was sort of doing things with that were all going to go off to Italy to be doing extra work on the movie of Romeo and Juliet. And I thought, well, that would be lovely to do. And there were a lot of people who worked for the Old Vic and in London, and were sort of being taken over to Italy. I don't know why, because the Italian stitches are better than anywhere in the world. Anyway, there we were. I was to make the choice, and I decided I'd come to New York. And I came to New York, and I worked at Ray's and learned a lot there. And then I met my husband, and I think it was rather interesting. I met him the night his house burned down opposite to where he was living.
Wow, it's a dramatic way to meet then.
And he was a producer and a designer, and he was producing a play, Ballad of the Sad Cafe, which took place in the South in the 20s. And he said, well, you better do the costumes. And I said, well, I don't know anything about the South. I don't know anything about what these people were like. And he said, well, you look at the research. You look at the research. You do your homework. And I ended up doing it. And that was my first Broadway production in 1963.
Gosh.
And I've probably at least one play on Broadway every year since then.
That's amazing.
I don't know. It's work.
And do you think it's probably hard for you to say why, but you know, what do you think that your kind of sustained success comes from? Is it obviously, you know, talent, and but is it, what is it that?
Well, I'll tell you. One of the things, probably one of the main things, is that I went to teach at Yale in 1976. And I only retired last year. So I taught there 43 years. And every Wednesday I went to New Haven. And it didn't matter where I was. I went to New Haven on Wednesdays and I taught. And I think that seeing those students year after year, and seeing the really bright ones, see the ones who were going to settle into being teachers, the ones who were going to end up being brilliant designers, whatever, it sort of gave me tremendous encouragement always to see their work. And I would look at some of their things and I'd say, oh, I don't think so, I don't think so, I think that's a terrible idea. You know something? It's actually a very good idea. And you know that young people keep you vital.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was teaching until I was 85, and I thought, well, I suppose it's about time to stop. But they did really keep me on the edge.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing.
I think that's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you're right. I mean, you can always keep learning as well from being, you know, being connected with younger people, can't you, yourself? It's
Yes, and you learn from everybody.
Mm.
And it's that constant thing of always being able to learn and, you know, to absorb new things as they happen, and see what you see and how you like it and how you can use it.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. What would you say is the most memorable production that you've been involved in? Is there one that stands out, or is it there's just so many?
Well, there've been so many. You know, I've worked with so many people, with Katharine Hepburn and Ingrid Bergman and Zoe Caldwell when she did Medea was fantastic. And on as I've gone through, there have been exciting, interesting people to work with. And I suppose actually, you talk about memorable. A few years ago in Dallas, I did a production of Moby Dick with the Dallas Opera. Ben Heppner was singing the Captain Ahab. And they called me up and they said, I don't know if you'd be interested in this opera, but it's just a load of dirty old sailors. Is it something you'd be interested in doing? And I thought, well, Moby Dick, it gives me an opportunity to really read Moby Dick. And I said, yes, of course. Never thinking of trials and tribulations we would have with getting Ben Heppner to wear a peg leg. And that in itself was momentous because he was quite a large man and he wasn't a young man, and we had to work out so that he would be able to put his knee up, and we had to have something to hold his leg up, and how he would work with one leg, working, and he had to have a stick, a special height, and how it was going to affect his singing, and how he was going to, it was tremendous. But he did it, and we did it, and it was a thrilling evening. All around it was thrilling because it was such a success, and it was using a lot of projections, which were new then, much newer than they are now, and it all came together and was really exciting. And it's been to quite a few different opera houses, but I'm told that it is now going to be given a production at the Metropolitan Opera House here in New York in 2025. So I don't know if I'll still be around to see it.
That's planning ahead, crikey. Do you ever get to sit and watch, or are you always having to be on hand in case of any disasters, or do you ever get to sit in the audience and actually watch and kind of appreciate your handiwork?
Oh yes, and I love it, and I love going to the I love going to theatre, and I love watching movies. And I love watching old movies too. I love, there's a channel here called Turner Classic Movies, and they have all sorts of incredible things on, and I love it. I love seeing these things that they put on at midnight, you know, it's sort of from 1920 or something.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. Yes, I love watching. I love seeing when it's good. It's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's your take on, so the last few months obviously have been incredibly difficult for anyone in creative industries generally, really. Do you think that everything will come back, or?
I think it was sort of quite overwhelming. I was called on the Thursday afternoon, I think it was March 12th or 13th, and they said, Jane, don't come to the theatre. I was working on Plaza Suite with Sarah Jessica Parker and Matthew Broderick, and we were going to have an invited audience that night, and then we were having our first preview the next night. And we had been previous to that in Boston at the Colonial, which is one of the most beautiful theatres in the world. And we had been there and had 2 weeks playing there, and the audience had just eaten it up with a spoon. So we were all very excited about coming to New York, and we had a feeling that it was going to be sort of something that was going to be light and bright and lift the audience, because things had been sort of rather troublesome and dreary. And they said to me, don't come in this afternoon, stay home. And I said, but we're doing a dress rehearsal tonight. And they said, oh, well, it may be cancelled. My goodness, what's going on? I called my friend Tom Watson, the wig designer, and I said, what's going on? He said, I've just been called and told not to come in. And then I thought, isn't this odd? And what had happened was myself, Tom and John Lee Beatty, who was the set designer, we were all over 65. And they were saying that people of that age were at the most vulnerable. And in fact, somebody had gone down with coronavirus in the company. So the production was cancelled that night, but all productions on Broadway were cancelled that night. And it was devastating. I mean, we couldn't believe it. Everything, literally the lights went out and it would be shut down. And that's, we were amazed at what would happen. And of course, after that, it really did take hold here in New York. And we had a very, very bad time. We had a lot of cases, but I just stayed home. I did what I was told. I stayed home and I stayed home and I stayed home. And that's what I've done really since then. I've been at the house, and I go out a little walk. I take my dog for a little walk. In the last couple of months, have sort of weakened and gone to Spear Physical Therapy, and I've had a couple of acupuncture shots, but apart from that, I've really done very little.
That's incredible. Are things starting to open up again? You know, are there plans for the theatre to open up? Or
you say things opening again. So many places have closed. And it's sort of really weird to go down, to go Fifth Avenue and even into the Village, into Soho, and see all these shops just boarded up. No activity. And Sarah, who's, as I said, is working on this series. They're trying to, you know, start off, and they're buying clothes and getting new clothes. And it's very hard. The shops have very little in the way of stock. and it's very hard finding fabrics. You know, it's just not been coming into the country, and it's everything seems to be really low here at the moment. And I don't know how they're going to get people back into the theatre until they get a vaccine, really. Because so many of the theatres are the old-fashioned type and have like 3 entryways and tight chairs and seats and tiny backstage areas. And lots of them are sort of totally ill-equipped for this kind of, you know, separation. So we'll see. And it's very sad, because you see what has happened is that with the theatre closing down, no tourists. So we have empty hotels. Lots of the hotels, even one hotel up on the Upper West Side has been turned into a place for people who haven't no the homeless men. And they've had them there up in the Upper West Side in a very good hotel, and it's actually been quite useful. But that's what's been happening.
Yeah, it's similar here,
And
with a lot of the hotels certainly doing that kind of thing, and yeah.
Well, yes, you have the same thing. And no hotel workers, because there are very few. And all the street vendors and everything has come to a halt. And it's quite, it's extraordinary to see New York like this, and very disturbing.
Yeah.
I hope that it has the, you know, the spine I think it has to sort of pull itself together again when we can.
Well, hopefully, you know, there's promising news on the horizon, so maybe we're coming towards the end of it.
Yes, the vaccine is very hopeful, but it's going to take a lot of time, and a lot of people to, who are they going to give it to? You know, and has it really been proved to be
effective?
You know,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah.
So we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see what next year brings. But is there anything, you talked about the trips you went on at school, but any anything you picked up at school that you've kind of carried with you through your life, or any particularly kind of fond memories? Did you stay in touch with your school friends?
With me, one thing.
Yeah, of course.
Well, I think I learned a great deal I think I was there for 3 years. I came in upper fifth. Upper fifth. I was upper fifth, lower sixth, upper sixth, those 3 years. I was at Waterloo Park for a year.
Okay.
When we moved from Anfield to Crosby, and I first went to Waterloo Park, and I didn't do too well there. And I loved this. I met people who were from Merchant Taylors, and they were good friends. And I still have a good friend who lives in Wales. Her name is Heather Riddio, and she was in my class. She and Carolyn Bell and myself, we were a real strong threesome, and we did everything together. We always shared our lunches together and did all that, and it was a great time. Good friends, and I think she still comes to Old Girls, and she keeps up, and she always sends me a Christmas card.